Get it?
Yeah, dude, absolutely. So, um, anyway, let's chat. I don't really feel like I need to do an introduction for Eric. You guys all
No,
know
I did one of these before too, so I'm pretty sure I
Yeah,
remember how it rolls.
yeah, you're in. You're in already. So
Nice.
let's talk, guys. What do you guys want to talk to Eric about? You guys all have questions. That's why we're doing this. Who's afraid? Who's afraid to ask questions?
Uh, now having two places, kids and everything, how much time do you actually get to spend on the coaching floor?
It's a little bit, I guess, cyclical throughout the year. I spend a ton of time on the floor, basically the first day of October all the way through the end of February. There tends to be a lot less in March, April into like mid-May, and then it ramps up again like crazy for the summer. And then from like August 15th until about September 20th, it quiets down again. So it may be 40 hours a week, and then it may be 10. So it can shuffle throughout the year.
How do you choose? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Eric. I was going to ask you a question.
We kind of structure me as a little bit of a bonus coach in Massachusetts because that facility effectively has to run without me for 7 months. So John O'Neill is our director of performance, and he really makes sure all the trains run on time and everything. And I kind of show up and shake hands and kiss babies, and then do the evaluations on like the one-time consults, the pro guys, things like that come from out of town.
How do you choose how to spend your time? Because that's the interesting thing to me, because I know how busy you are, and how do you make that decision?
So it's a little challenging now because our daughters are actually starting preschool this fall. So that kind of is going to impact the decision moving forward. But basically, I go where the baseball players are is a good way to look at it. So the second the big league season ends is usually when I head to Florida. And I'll spend September in Massachusetts. I see a fair amount of minor league guys who have just wrapped up their season. And then basically guys report to spring training. Usually minor league guys, the last ones of them will go in like early March. There were a few that stuck around this year because of the way the free agent signing went, but usually we'll come back up like April 1. So it's April 1 through the end of September in Massachusetts. So has the perk of giving us Florida residency status for state income taxes and all that. But there's always a little bit of back and forth. So like we go to Massachusetts for Christmas, and then, I'll come down here for 3 or 4 check-ins during that 5-month period too.
Yeah. And then it's like, because you get to, just from talking to Pete and stuff, like you get to basically just be like mostly technician. You don't have to do a lot of the other stuff that some of the other business guys have to.
In Massachusetts, that's definitely the case. So if you look at like the entrepreneur, the technician, the manager, Pete is the majority of the managerial stuff. Like he handles payroll, sales pitches, scheduling, stuff like that. Like I can't remember the last time I answered the phone or swiped a credit card in Massachusetts. John plays a lot of like managerial roles with respect to like other staff members, interns, things like that. And then I'm definitely like a technician, but I have to kind of also wear that entrepreneurial hat a little bit more with, so like, if you look at like our college summer program, it's, 28 guys that moved there from around the country. Like most of them found out about it through, my writing or Instagram or whatever it is. So I have to be pretty active on like the lead generation side of things. Florida, I have to do a lot of other stuff that the goal is to get me away from that as this business becomes more mature. But I still wear a lot of hats in the Florida side of things.
Yeah. That's a lot to manage, man.
Yeah. It sounds way more glamorous than it is, by the way, having the 2 facilities. Like I'm glad we did it. And, it was definitely a good decision in terms of like growing the brand and all that. But, you definitely deal with a whole new host of headaches when you start any new business. But the back and forth is crazy. My wife was, she pulls her hair out this time of year because it's always like you're planning for the next move. And for us, we went from basically the best public schools in the country in Massachusetts. And then we have to, effectively everything we save on state income tax is pretty much reallocated to private schools in Florida. So it's kind of a trade-off.
That is rough.
The joys of parenting.
Yeah. I don't have to worry about it yet. Lots of other people do want to, but anyway, I'll shut up and let you guys ask questions. Who's got something?
I saw on your Q&A on your Instagram, someone posted something about some of McGill's work in rotational athletes and avoiding deadlifting or squats, I believe. Can you just get into that a little bit?
For sure. Yeah, I think the question was definitely related by someone who I think had taken some of McGill's work out of context. Really where a lot of that stuff originated was you saw like Tiger Woods having, quite a few disc injuries, significant back pain that kind of coincided, with the time when he got, really, really big into strength conditioning and lifting really, really heavy. You see like videos of like Rory McIlroy doing some pretty crazy stuff with Olympic lifts and heavy squatting and stuff. So, McGill, I think, I don't want to say it was like cherry picking, but he was basically creating the point of, there are guys who have had significant back issues in these aggressive extension rotation populations, when they really got after it, potentially to excess with that stuff. And the point he was trying to make is that, if you look at, we've all seen like the pictures on Facebook of, like the hips from Eastern Europe versus the hips from like Ireland and Scotland, like they just have different structures. And one of the points he was trying to make is if you actually look at the vertebrae of like elite rotational sport athletes, they're built a lot different than what they are, in terms of like NFL linemen. And, if you look at like retired powerlifters, like the trabecular bone density is just off the charts. So preparing a body for like aggressive rotation and shear stresses is a lot different than preparing it for aggressive compression. I think sometimes you can take away some of the resiliency if you train to the exclusion. So for us, when we train our baseball players, we still load them bilaterally. Like our guys squat, they deadlift, they do a lot of like, what would you consider maybe conventional strength and conditioning stuff. But at the same time, we're training med ball stuff. They're playing baseball 7 to 8 months out of the year. So there's obviously these like implements, but you always want to be careful about like, pushing a little bit of that specificity out in favor of just assuming that if you squat and deadlift heavy, everything's going to magically happen because, in his experience, spines don't necessarily do well chasing crazy compressive loads when they're involved in, rotational sports that, require a lot more, like, for lack of a better term, pliability through the spine.
And that's also talking about more elite level athletes.
Yeah, I think so. I think, that we're not having a discussion about like the high school kid who needs to be able to trap bar deadlift 405 or something like that. Like that's obviously really, really low hanging fruit. We can get some great adaptation. I look at more as like, if you take like a right-handed golfer, right, you're going to have counterclockwise rotation of the pelvis while the torso is still rotating clockwise. So you have to allow that hip shoulder separation to occur. And that's true of, hockey, that's true of baseball, that's true of, tennis players, you name it. And what you see with a lot of these people who just aggressively train bilaterally is they don't understand how to create that sequential motion. Like if you look at me, like I have a 600-pound deadlift and I don't use my hips at all when I swing a golf club. So it's, some people are just, they've trained themselves out of it. So I think we just need to be cognizant of not letting them go, push everything else out as they chase a big number.
Okay, thanks.
You got it. By the way, I made kale for dinner and I ate it right before I came on the air. So if you guys look really closely, you might see a bunch of it in my feel free to judge me. I'm just proud of myself for cooking my own dinner.
When you're on the coaching floor, do you find yourself coaching a lot more or a lot less, depending if there's pro baseball players or high school or college players?
I don't know if it's more or less. It's just different. I think in the case of like pro guys, most of them that have come to us, certainly guys that have been with us for years, and even the guys that may be coming to us, in age 24, like they've usually been exposed to their team strength and conditioning, their college strength and conditioning, maybe a high school strength and conditioning coach before they ever got to us. So usually they have, a pretty good set of context to draw from. So more often than not, on the fly, it's like a demonstrate a rep and then have them go to it. Like, and if you get somebody who's like a real nerd for it, give them the rationale behind it. But usually I like to, put them in a situation where they can't fail, have them show us a rep or two, and then we tinker just a tiny bit. And usually the difference between high school and pro guys, to be honest, is like the pro guys, one cue usually fixes it. Sometimes it's like, all right, your elbow's too close to your side on your row. I just put my fist between your elbow and your side. Don't hit my fist. Like little things like that can usually, kind of resolve it really quickly. With high school kids, you need to have option A, B, C, and D in many cases, just because they don't have that incredible set of context to draw from. So one of the things I always tell our interns when they get there is like the worst thing you can do with a pro guy is overcoach. Best thing is like see how it looks, make sure that you don't load it like crazy on the first, couple reps. And it's usually a really, really quick fix. I think that also serves to improve like the overall training environment. Like we had an intern, it was probably back in like 2011. that a couple of our pro guys nicknamed Captain Correction, just because he like like one right after the other. And so it was kind of like a little bit of a turn off to them. So I think when you say less, you have a chance to be much more impactful and get through the athlete on a personal level much quicker.
Eric, as a Mets fan, I want to thank you highly for Noah Syndergaard.
We're trying.
Any way you can get the rest of the staff on your the rest of the pitching
we're
staff?
working on it. We got a few others that are in the mix, so mum's the word, but yeah, we're on top of it.
But actually, I had a question about it.
Yeah.
So, like, the culture there, like at least from an outsider observer, it seemed like they were doing a bunch of dumb shit. They have the best pitching staff in the major leagues, and they keep getting hurt. So, did you have to like? I mean, it seems like he probably sought you out, like, but was there any like sort of buy-in that you needed to create of like educating him on what he should be doing versus what he was doing?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing I'd tell you is I'll give you an example of something that's maybe a little bit off the wall. I once saw a pro baseball player go on the disabled list with a groin strain. And do you know what his actual symptoms were? Painful burning during urination. So the point to that is that, like, as an outsider to like fan, like what you hear in the media is often like skewed in one way or another. And I'm not speaking to the Mets situation at all, but like you always get maybe a little bit of a different story, kind of when you hear it in the media. And even some of the sports writers, I like last night, Ron Darling called the game, and I think it was Andujar was on second base, and he was like, there's no shot anybody stealing signs with a rookie on second base. I'm like, there are loads of rookies in Major League Baseball who know how to steal signs. So even like the commentators, sometimes they're just guessing, like the ESPN broadcast last week with like pitching velocities, they were just entirely off. So with that said, Noah, I actually have known Noah since he was in high school. So he had reached out to me 7 or 8 years ago when he was drafted, and he would always kind of like read my stuff online. And what a lot of people don't know about him, or maybe they know now, he's actually like a really big time nerd with respect to the training process. Like he spent hours talking diet with Tim Tebow during spring training, and he really like nerds out with stuff. Like he loved the K box, he loved the Versapol, he wanted to know about like eccentric overload training, all these different things. So Noah's also interesting because he definitely has bounced around like amongst different training philosophies. There's been powerlifting, there's been just get as big as I can. And so he's gotten really big into FRC. So there's all these different kind of like mindsets that I think he's been exposed to. So where Noah, I think was unique for us is, you wanted to give him an active role in the training process. So like, when he's got a week left on a program, he's already sending us requests for what he wants to include. He talked to my business partner, Shane, for like an hour the other day. They're in Ireland right now, and then he's coming in November when they get back about what he wants to do. So I think it's a really good lesson. So like I use the example, like if you take like Syndergaard, Scherzer, and Kluber, like I've worked with Kluber for over 9 years now. He literally does everything I say to a T and is an amazing communicator. Like there's a give and take, but more often than not, he just like trusts it and believes my expertise because I've known him since he's in high A. Scherzer, I got who was already well into his career and had been very successful. He had a very established routine. So more often than not, like the stuff that with Max is, it's pushing him when he wants to be pushed. When you feel like he's dragging some days, it's and it's a little bit more of one of mine, one of yours. So we meet in the middle, and he probably gets a little bit more open-minded to some of our philosophies, every single year. So I think you have to really, especially at that level, like obviously there's higher levels of compensation, and, and certainly like demands for their attention. I think you really have to get to know the person and get through them that way. So, I'm excited about Noah though, and Giselman too. Those guys do everything together, so we'll see both of them in a couple of weeks.
In my notes for that, I just wrote down Syndergaard has an STD, and that pretty much
thanks.
That pretty much covers it.
He did have hand, foot, and mouth disease this year. I think he missed a start for that. So.
Hey man, that happens. That happens. Yeah. In the time that you've been around, with as much as training kids and youth athletes has changed, what are a couple of things that you see that have really changed for the better that you get excited about? What are a couple of things that you're looking at where you're just like, man, that's really going in the wrong direction?
You know what I do really like is if you're a very, very good prospect, or you're just a kid who's an average athlete but is really willing to work, there are more resources available to you to live your dream than ever possible. So like, similar to like, any up and coming strength and conditioning coach can go online and they can find amazing stuff. They can do stuff like this. Like when I was coming up, like it would have been unheard of. Like, I mean, I didn't send an email to my first semester of college. So we didn't have access to this expertise. If you look at like Trevor Bauer. I mean, Bauer has effectively, he's very, very forward about like, I was a mediocre athlete. I'm not strong. I'm not fast. Like there's a guy who's used technology to his advantage really to develop pitches and use like, a really, really high level camera work to make sure that everything comes out of the same tunnel. So I think that's the cool thing is now that you have more access to expertise than ever before, you have more access to technology that, allows you to identify stuff. Even just like the last 3 years, look at the quality of like slow motion videos on iPhones. Like I use my iPhone all the time with like pitching mechanics, and you can see like, where is this guy's arm at when he's at weight bearing foot strike. So you can really see like in real time how to coach people better. So I think that's something that's really good about the youth sports. The problem is also that, like the more of that you have, the more, crazy parents are willing to invest in terms of time and energy and money. So I think there's certainly a trend in the wrong direction in other capacities, but that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Just a heads up on the awkward silences, Eric. We ride them out until somebody's breaks and asks a question.
Fine. I can do awkward if you want.
Good.
Speaking of which, where's Chris?
Chris doesn't care about us anymore.
Brutal.
Yeah. He changed his contracts. He only has to show up on Wednesday afternoons, and then that's it. No, I'm just joking.
He's the franchise?
Yeah, he's the franchise guy. So
I was going to say, I don't know if you guys are even Redskins fans, but they don't play until what, tomorrow night? Is it Monday night?
No, I don't think he gives a shit about the Redskins, honestly. So
I was going to give him an out. I was trying.
No, he has no excuse. No excuse.
What's one major, I guess, part of training that may have changed from when you first started to how you're training guys now? Is there one big change that may have happened?
Are you thinking more on the technical side of things, more like from a logistics side of things? What I mean, give me like an example of something that's changed for you over that time, and I'll see if I can draw a parallel.
Yeah, in the gym, for example, you used to always start with squatting 3 days a week, or don't bench anymore because we're throwers, something along those lines.
So like any big rocks that have changed dramatically. I think, I came up as a power lifter. So the natural tendency is, coming up as a power lifter from, really from like 2003 to 2007 was probably when I was most competitive in that regard. Like you have this natural bias towards wanting to train everybody to be a power lifter. And you think that, just box, squat, deadlift, and bench and everything's going to magically come around. And, I can just remember being in powerlifting gyms where the solution for everything was arch harder, and so, there's certainly people that are being coached like that still, unfortunately. And, we're realizing now with our baseball players, they need to learn to reverse that arch, do more reaching and rounding and rotating through their scaps. So I think that's maybe been a giant principle. And, you can largely thank Postural Restoration Institute for really getting the ball rolling in the right direction on that side of things. So I'd say that was a big one, like working proximal to distal, like understanding how, what you do centrally with core control and rib positioning and all that can impact what happens more distally at the extremities. That's something that's really big. And then maybe it's just like an overall like thought process. Like, if you're going to stretch something, understanding why you're stretching it, are you taking away protective tension? Are you plowing through a bony block? Like, what is it that you're doing? So, those are all big things, above all else. And maybe it's just that I'm in a baseball world and to be honest, like parallels to that. I mean, we do some stuff with tennis. We do some stuff with some NFL quarterbacks. I think I've definitely like changed my perspective on like what an athlete should be. And I don't think it should be one thing, but you look and a lot of these athletes are very successful because of traits or characteristics more than just like raw athleticism. Like not everybody, like if you went into like the average major league locker room, even your fastest players, you'd be sorely disappointed if you had them go out and like run a 40 or something like that for you. So I just think you try to, meet them where they're at and figure out how they can improve, but not necessarily assign yourself to the idea that, it's just about getting a 40-inch vertical jump or a, 600-pound squat.
Now, going back to that technology part we were talking about, how do you find like reliable information? There's a lot of like, I guess you want to call it pseudoscience or like unproven science. Like obviously there's the basis of training, whether it's bodybuilding or whatever, and there's a basis in that. How do you find new information like reliably to actually where you feel comfortable telling a client?
Yeah, that's a challenge because it's an equal part, science and art. There's a really good quote. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Fergus Connolly. Fergus wrote a book called Game Changer and has done some pretty high-level sports science stuff with Michigan. And before that, he was with the San Francisco 49ers. We're basically wherever Harbaugh has gone, he's gone. And he said the most invaluable part of a sports scientist is knowing what not to do. You could literally spend your entire year's earnings just on technology, all kinds of different things. And for me, I try not to get too caught up in the data revolution. To me, data is only there if it drives an intervention. And I think that's a big mistake. You're not just there to like quantify something for the sake of quantifying it. You actually ought to be able to use it as an opportunity to measure a change. So I'll give you a good example. There's a piece of equipment. It's called Rapsodo. Rapsodo is basically it's a little mini tower that you can put behind a catcher while a pitcher is throwing a bullpen. And Rapsodo gives you a collection of different pieces of information about every pitch. It'll give you the location of the pitch, so it'll call balls and strikes for you. It'll give you the velocity. It'll give you the spin rate. So as a really, really quick background, like if you throw a high spin rate fastball, it kind of takes off. So think like Jacob deGrom throwing fastballs up that guys think they can catch up to and they can't. If you throw a low spin rate fastball, it tends to be much more of a sinker. So one of the things that you look at, baseball in general is trending towards a lot more high spin rate fastballs. So you'd see a lot of people that would just take a video of a 16-year-old kid throwing a bullpen and be like, wow, there's a 2300 RPM fastball. That's a great spin rate, whatever. But the point is that you're just quantifying it. It's not doing anything to change it. For us, we use Rapsodo with our college athletes as a frame of reference. When they come in on day one, we do a thorough movement assessment, and then we say, hey, I want you to go and do a warm-up exactly like you would do it if we weren't here. If you were just in the bullpen at your college, and then I want you to throw a pen right afterwards, and we'll actually quantify stuff. And based on the results of our movement screen, we'll actually go and we'll give them 2 to 3 quick interventions. Maybe it's some positional breathing. It may be a mechanical cue. Something that we feel like is targeted to their specific movement needs. And then we'll have them go back out and throw a second inning. And you'd be surprised. You'll see guys whose spin rate goes up 150 to 200 RPMs. And that's a really, really powerful change. That means that you can get away with more four seams up. It does things that can really, really help them. So for me, if we're going to have data collection, it has to directly drive some kind of decision. It allows us to monitor guys. Like if we're tracking hip and turn rotation from one year to the next, we want to go through and specifically keep track of how guys adapt to the season. So we have a kid who came in and just played his first year in the big leagues, and I've seen him. This is the 4th year I've seen him right at the end of the season, and he came in and it was just didn't have like a true big league shoulder. Like it only went to about 100 degrees. Didn't really lay back like crazy. And to be honest, I hadn't seen him in close to a year. He pops in for like 2 days at the end of every season. So I was able to go back and look at my notes for the last 3 years, and that's who he is. He's just not a huge like retroverted guy. So we had that baseline to fall back on instead of saying, all right, we need to send him for loads and loads of manual therapy on subscap and lat, and maybe we need to actively stretch him into ER. It just allows us to drive some kind of training decisions. I just never loved the idea of collecting data just for the sake of collecting data.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that was good.
Would you have told me if it wasn't good, though? Honest?
No, absolutely not. What'd you think of Price last night?
That was a tough one. Everyone actually, everyone thinks I'm like cheering aggressively for the Red Sox, and I kind of can't be a fan of a team anymore. I cheer for players more than anybody else. So to be honest, like Lance Lynn's one of our guys, and then Radley Haddad is the Yankees bullpen catcher. He's one of like my favorite people on the planet. I'm going to his wedding in November. So I was very neutral last night. I like to watch good baseball, but I don't know. That's tough for Price, man. I'd like to see him actually get a playoff win. You feel like he
Yeah.
deserves it after all these years?
I'm currently in Boston, so
Oh yeah.
Matt, did you have a question? Did you?
Yeah. So I'll be meeting with a middle school baseball player in the coming week or so. Just as far as like focus on like programming stuff, would you go more of like like shoulder like stuff, or you just focus on like general movement patterns?
At that age,
Thoughts on that?
I would think of him more as he's an athlete more than a baseball player. Look for the big rocks, the classic, squat, lunge, push, pull, hinge, all that stuff. Those are the money makers. The only thing you do differently is maybe you do add some extra arm care stuff in, a little bit of cable external rotation stuff at the end of a session or something like that. And if you do that, you're in a pretty good spot. But yeah, I wouldn't, micromanage it too much at that age. It's more about making training fun and getting the biggest bang for your buck. Here's what I'll say is there's actually a little bit of research that shows that if you look at elite professional pitchers compared to amateur pitchers, so younger guys like that, pros use their lats 200% more during acceleration during the pitch. So the idea is very simple. Like they use big muscles to do big jobs. What we see in younger kids is they actually use like their rotator cuff muscles to generate force as opposed to creating joint stability. So number one thing you can do for a young guy like that is get him strong with good techniques so that you can set the stage for doing a little bit more of the advanced stuff later.
Sure. Cool. Thanks.
You got it.
Do you I guess you come across a lot? Do you training guys who a lot of times are injured, and how long can you wait? Do you wait for them to get healthy before you really get starting the rehab process, I guess?
Yeah. I think it's a gray area. Everyone is to some degree injured, right? You could do an MRI of any spine or shoulder, anything like that. So really we're just talking about the presence of symptoms versus not. We're lucky in both cases. We have a physical therapist working out of each of our facilities. We have massage therapists working out of both of our facilities. So we co-manage a lot. But when it's someone who's working with a physical therapist or a doctor outside of ours, I think where we've done a good job over the years is we've done a lot of outreach there to make sure those lines of communication are open. So, that the athlete's in a good position to be successful with respect to their rehab, but B, it also, it makes us look good in the eyes of those sports medicine professionals. They know that we're thorough. So, ultimately down the road, it usually leads to more referrals. So, there's an article I wrote. It's called "Making the Case for Training in the Post-Surgery Period." But there's loads of research that shows like if you have elbow surgery on your right side, you should be training like crazy on your left side. And there's a lot of crossover effect, and certainly there's loads of benefits to exercise that extend far beyond tissue specific adaptations. So we do a lot of stuff with post-surgery cases. We'll train guys after a Tommy John as soon as 2 weeks post-op. And we've had really, really good success with over the years.
now how did you get into baseball when you first started Cressey, whatever it was the plan basically I want to get into shoulder rehab, this is what I want to do, or did it like involve into that?
Yeah, it actually happened very much by accident. So I finished my grad degree at the University of Connecticut in 2005. During my time at UConn, I had actually been mostly involved with varsity strength and conditioning with really the 5 teams I worked the most with were men's and women's basketball, men's and women's soccer, and field hockey. So I only had a little bit of exposure to baseball while I was at UConn. I actually thought I was going to go and become a college basketball strength and conditioning coach, and even looked at some positions in that regard, and ultimately decided to go to the private sector instead. And it just so happened that some of the first high school athletes I worked with were baseball guys. And I immediately kind of took an interest in it just because of my own shoulder history from playing tennis. And long story short, there were 4 of them that first winter. They won a state championship. One of them won state player of the year. They all went Division I. And on my birthday, it was May 20th, 2007, the Boston Globe ran an article about basically their their success and mentioned our training. And literally I did like a Jerry Maguire for the next 2 days. My phone literally rang off the hook with like every parent from that school district and, kind of the surrounding ones. And so things really took off from there. And without even realizing it, I kind of became the baseball guy. But when we actually opened our facility, we didn't have any expectations of being like very, very baseball specific. Like I was still doing some combine prep. We trained, some people for like Army fitness tests. We had general population, we had triathletes, you name it. So, we definitely, and we still do have a lot of those people. I mean, like we work with Jacoby Brissett, who's the quarterback for the Colts. We work with Maria Sharapova. We see a lot of different stuff. So, and I definitely enjoy that side of things. So, but it was never really the goal. It just kind of, it evolved. That was where the biggest need was. That was the most underserved market. And that's where I think, our expertise really lined up with what was needed. Word of mouth is always what does it, no matter where you are. Just kind of sometimes the industry picks your niche for you.
When it comes to culture, you guys have been around so long now, you've had enough turnover in staff. Would you say with kind of the culture and the vibe that you guys put out at and I don't know if it's the same at both locations or if it's a little bit different from location to location, but is it staff driving that culture even with staff turnover? Or is it kind of the long-term clientele that you've had that are really kind of passing that along and kind of almost, I don't want to say instructing the new staff as they come in, but existing clientele goes a long ways towards kind of telling people what the vibe should be. I'm just kind of curious how that works with you guys.
Yeah, I think it's both. And I think it's also maybe reaffirmed by, if you look at some of our staff members. So as an example, like John O'Neill trained with us actually as an athlete when he was in college. He had a shoulder surgery and couldn't quite get his velocity back. So he drove up from Pennsylvania to try to get it all figured out. And, I really like worked with John in a distance-based context for a couple of years while he was still playing college baseball. And when he kind of finished up his degree, he looked at going into baseball and then went up interning with us in 2014 at our Jupiter facility. And, then when the position came up in Massachusetts, he came up work there. So he's seen it as a client, he's seen it as an intern, and he's seen it as a staff member. So I think he has, a long time under his belt. He's understood what we are for 7 or 8 years now. So I think that really, really helps. I think it's probably 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I think certainly it's maybe Pete and me, and then obviously Shane and Brian, my business partners in Florida, driving a lot of like that side of things. And then I think it's the staff. So your culture does change just a little bit. Like I'd say we have like a little bit of like more of a goofball culture at our Massachusetts facility. So like, as a frame of reference, like John will like randomly shut the music off and grab a kid off the floor and have him throw out the first pitch in the middle of like the gym on a random busy Monday afternoon. Kyle will announce that he's going to the bathroom to the whole gym. Like we have just like more of a goofy culture up there, and that's maybe different than it was 3 years ago. Down in Florida, we have, maybe more of like it's a little bit of like a laid back dynamic too. So there's just, I don't know that we've specifically tried to drive it. I think we've let the athletes really dictate it a little bit more. And I think it's also maybe a little bit different throughout the day, like what you would get between 10 and 2, on a weekday during the thick of our pro crowd might be different than what you have with your high school guys from, 3 to 6:30 or something like that. So, that's a tough one. I certainly, there are mistakes I've made on the cultural side of things. I think Dan Coyle's book, I don't know if you guys have read it, but it's an outstanding read, and it's something that was certainly helpful for me, moving forward. But I think you always want your staff and your athletes to feel like they do have the right to take some ownership of that side of things.
What was the name of the book?
The Culture Code by Dan Coyle.
Sweet.
Actually, here's something that's really interesting on the culture side of things. There was a book another one I'll give you, The Best Team Wins. It was recommended by my buddy Josh Bonenthal. Josh was the basketball strength coach for Purdue and just left to take a job in the private sector in California. But he had recommended it. And one of the really intriguing things about that book was actually they did a lot of comparative studies of baby boomers, Gen Xers, and then millennials. So technically I'm 1981, so I'm the first year of the millennials. But they're saying that we need our own category of like Xennials or something like that, because we don't necessarily identify with the modern version. But one of the things that they did, and these numbers aren't exact, but so don't quote me on them, but they looked at all the different characteristics of job success in those different populations. And they found that in baby boomers, autonomy ranked like number 3 overall. Like the gist was that folks in the baby boomer generation, they wanted to be left alone. They knew what they were doing. They wanted the autonomy to do the task how they want to do it. And what was interesting is autonomy scored incredibly low in millennials. It actually was shockingly low. I think it was like 24th out of 25. And that may be different for a group of self-driven individuals like this who are really high achievers, but it's definitely impacted the way that maybe we've managed our staff. But what the millennial population really aspires for is they want to be part of a team. They want to be part of something they feel like is bigger than them. They want to feel like their opinion matters. I mean, they love, meanwhile they say that they want to work remotely a lot more. That's like a high priority job characteristic they look for. So like it sounds like a really silly thing to say, but with your younger staff members, sometimes having that like staff dinner, like sticking around to play pickup hoops with the guys on a Friday afternoon, is actually like the best thing you can do to build morale and get everybody like rowing in the same direction. So that's I think one of my biggest fears in business, and Pete and I have joked about this a lot, is that I'm 37, he's 37 now too, and our staff members are in some cases 13 to 14 years younger than us. And certainly the athletes are, 20 something years younger than us. So we really have to be cognizant of not becoming like those boring old guys. We're going to do our best to try to stay relevant and cool.
That's funny.
Especially now that I tell really bad dad jokes.
Now, when you opened up the second location, how do you copy the success you had from the first one? Because obviously you can't be in the same place, 2 places at the same time. So how do you copy, I guess, the culture, harking back to that question, in the next place with the next people you hire?
I'm going to steal a line. I actually used this on my Instagram Q&A yesterday. There's a guy named Alexis Ohanian. Alexis, he's actually a client at our facility here in Florida. He's married to Serena Williams. Alexis, his biggest claim to fame, though, is he founded Reddit, and now he runs, a pretty established venture capital firm. So he invests in a lot of younger, businesses that are just getting going. And he said there are really 3 things that businesses need to be successful: the right idea, the right people, and don't spend too much money. And you see a lot of businesses in the fitness industry that tank on all 3. Their ideas aren't good. They don't take time to like do their homework on who they hire, and then they blow money. They buy 14 different leg curls and instead of just getting one with glute ham raise or something like that. So I think we did a good job with that. Certainly our expansion went way over budget, so that was kind of a timeline thing. But we picked people that genuinely were interested in things going in the right direction. My wife is actually very involved in our business in Florida too. So there's a challenging dynamic of working with your wife, but at the same time, she at the end of the day is incredibly invested and cares about the success of the business. So she works incredibly hard too. So and we had already tested the idea. So I did a ton of focus groups with our baseball guys. Actually, we opened in the fall of 14. In the spring of 2013, my business partner Pete and I, we came down to Florida. We actually basically did a Florida sweep. We went to the World Baseball Classic to start off, and then we checked out Jupiter, we checked out Orlando, we checked out Tampa, we checked out Fort Myers. There's kind of 4 different locations, and really like spent a lot of time honestly driving around Florida in a little compact car, figuring out what the the longer term options were. I think the biggest thing is where we differentiate ourselves a lot in the baseball world is our network. Like literally, I don't think there's anybody that like knows as many agents well, knows like mutual friends, teammates, things like that of players. So, a lot of times what that leads to is this kind of discussion of like the law of repeated exposure. So I don't know if you guys have been like, heard of this before, but I remember like, 7 or 8 years ago, I read a book where they said, 7 was the number. So like, say, all right, you're in Boston, say you went on vacation, you came back to Boston and you're on a JetBlue flight and they offer you Dunkin' Donuts coffee and you say no. And then you get off the flight, you see a banner for Dunkin' Donuts in the airport, you say no. You walk past the Dunkin' Donuts, you still say no. Then you hear a radio ad while you're waiting for your shuttle bus or whatever it is, and then you drive past a billboard on the Mass Pike, and if you get to 7 exposures, chances are you're not buying the coffee, at least that day. And what they've actually shown more recently is that it's probably way more than 7. There's actually a really interesting study. I think it's only like 2% of transactions in the U.S. actually take place on the first interaction. More often than not, it's interaction 5 through 12. So I think people are really heavily desensitized to marketing messages. So we think of marketing and you think of sponsored posts on Instagram and the billboards you see and all those. But to me, marketing is also the word of mouth that's taking place. So I can't tell you how many guys I've had that have come in that have heard about us for years. Their agent's been on them to come in and see them, and the team mentions it. And it's not until they like read an article about a guy that trained with us who had a similar injury to what they're dealing with that they finally came in. Like we've had guys that have like visited our facilities with their buddies like over and over again and never trained with us, and then they finally come in down the road. So I think the lesson there is that if you build a really strong network and you're very consistent with your marketing efforts, even if they're not over the top, even if it's just like posting some Instagram videos and writing blogs and just being accessible, I think that's the stuff that goes a long way. And that's where we've really done well in the baseball world, is nurturing a lot of relationships over a long time.
Okay, that was a good answer.
Okay, I've got a question. Is it working?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was mute for a while. So I joined a little bit late for the Q&A, so apologies if this question was asked, but you mentioned blogs, and I was wondering, how have you found blogs to be helpful in terms of marketing and getting people to respond to you, and what would you say would help strengthen that impact with blogs?
It's actually changed. That's a really good question, and it hasn't been answered. So it was a good first question.
Yeah.
What I would actually tell you is that I think that the power of blogs has fallen off more and more. To me, it's much more important to have like a consistent social media output than it is to have like a new newsletter every single day. Like for me, I kind of aim for like a couple newsletters a week, and then daily content on social media. And I think that fits well. Like, I just don't think people in general are like gung ho about reading 2,000 word essays anymore. They like quick hitter stuff. So that's definitely something I've noticed. Still I have a large mailing list, and I work really hard to continue to grow that, because I think it's something that will sustain. But I'm curious to see how a lot of these email marketers will do in the next 15 years, because what I can tell you about dealing with the college athletes that I deal with is, and even our pro guys, I will email a new program to a pro guy and he will text me a thank you. So he'll see it on his email, open it, but rather than a reply to that email, he will open up a different app on his phone to text me thank you. So people are so conditioned to social media and texting, it's almost like email is like this dying thing. I'm sure open rates are going down, all over the place, and spam filters are at an all-time high. So I just think in general, blogs just haven't been quite as important. I can remember just like scrambling all the time to, I called it feeding the monster. Like you needed to always post, to the point that like I would go on vacation for a weekend. If I didn't send out a newsletter, people would like email to see if I was okay. Like, I haven't heard from you for a few days. But I think social media is a good way to kind of stay on top of it. And usually it's like quick hitter thought. So, all right, I can put out a 100-character tweet, on the fly, but not have to actually sit down and do like this laborious, hour and a half long writing process anymore. So, that's definitely a really good question. But I think the blogs definitely have been very helpful for us when it comes to establishing expertise. I think social media can maybe draw attention, but in many cases the exposures are so short that they don't. But case in point, I wrote a blog about spondylolysis probably 8 years ago, stress fractures in the lower back, right? So it's a common thing we see in young rotational sport athletes. Probably at any given time in one of our facilities, you'll see a kid that's in there with a back brace training who came to us after a spondy case. And so I wrote about it, and I'd be willing to bet we get one consult from out of town every month who read that blog. So it kind of happens. My lat strain writing has given us, kind of a lot of headway there. So in those cases where you're showing your expertise and giving folks an opportunity to pursue your services a little bit more, that can be really big. It's probably, a little bit easier for me in the baseball world, just because some of this stuff is so nuanced. It's very like intricate, and there aren't a lot of people. It's going to be really hard to be heard if you're like I'm going to write about fat loss. It's like everybody on the planet is writing about fat loss or supplements or whatever it may be. So I think in the baseball world, we're a little bit of the first to market, and it's endured because we've established that expertise. But the blogs can still be very helpful. But I would put more weight on like everyday social media content from
So more nuanced, unique blogs that show your expertise less frequently, and then a lot of daily reminders or content that can direct people to those blogs.
Exactly. And if you really, it's kind of like the Gary Vee stuff with the jab, right hook, like the social media stuff in many cases is the jabs. It keeps people, in a situation where there's top of mind awareness. They think of you on a regular basis. They're exposed to your stuff. And maybe the blog is the actual right hook. It's when you actually try to sell something or something to that effect. But I don't write blogs nearly as much as I used to. I still try to get out a couple a week, but if I'm not posting 150 a year, I'm not going to lose sleep over it as long as I'm active in other capacities.
Also, a couple a week is a lot. I was thinking like one a month, to add at the bottom of your monthly newsletter.
One thing I would tell you if you're like looking at blogging, and this is I think it was actually a Tim Ferriss recommendation. I can't recall, but make sure you write blogs that are timeless. It's don't just write ones that about like, a current event that happened right now or something like that. You try to deliver messages that will be somewhat timeless, but also, somebody's going to find that in the Google archives a year and a half from now, and you still want it to be relevant to them. So I do that too. And a lot of times I'll use old content with new subscribers. So if somebody subscribes to my newsletter today and they haven't seen something that I wrote in 2012 that was really, really good, we have, ways that we can kind of prioritize our mailings to different people at different timelines. So that's something that old content, new subscribers. And, like there's also ways, like a lot of my Instagram stuff is stuff that I've used in like, if I did like 10 thoughts on assessments was an article I wrote a couple of years ago. And honestly, that could be 10 different Instagram posts if you just want to frame it a little bit differently. So it's always good to reuse content across different mediums if you can.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thanks.
You got it. Thank you.
I guess if no one has another question, I know some people have blogs, so they write an article that gets published somewhere else, like in a magazine. Have you ever had that experience?
So like as in being like a guest author elsewhere, or in fact, that's honestly where a lot of it started. I wrote for T Nation and John Berardi's website and Men's Health and all those from like 2001 to 2003, and some in like print magazines, but some in just online mediums and stuff like that. So I'll still do periodic guest blogs in various places. I think it's definitely a way where you can kind of grow your following a little bit faster.
Yeah, definitely. And is that something you just email it or apply?
I think for me personally, I'll get like I'll get spam from like PR people and things like that who always want to just write like a guest post to get like links back to their site or to try to sell something that's not necessarily related to my readers. I always prefer when people actually submit something, like write something and blow my doors off. So I ran an article a couple weeks ago from a guy who's a strength and conditioning coach in the tennis world. It was actually outstanding. It was super thorough. He basically emailed, he said, here's an example of some of my writing. I had a couple ideas that I think would be a good fit for your readers. And like, it didn't come across as like spammy or anything like that. It didn't start with, hey there, it was actually like a
more professional looking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he handled it perfectly. And the article was outstanding. And I know we got some good follow-up kind of exposure from it. So definitely try to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Good tip. Thanks.
You got it.
Now, you were talking about one of the three things was save money, and then you started mentioning equipment. How do you go about picking the right equipment for the right location?
Ooh, that's a tough one. You first have to figure out what it is you're going to do, right? So if you're going to be like a kettlebell-driven strength camp place, like you need a bunch of kettlebells, you probably don't need like a monolift or something along those lines. So here's what I would tell you. Make sure you get things that your clients will use, not just stuff that you like. You're not going to like I wouldn't spend $6,000 on a leg press, like just especially from equipment standpoint. But I think there's also there are a lot of hidden costs when you start a facility. Like flooring is actually really, really expensive. There are going to be a lot of surprises in that regard. Even like if you get a space that's not, fully done, like drywall, believe it or not, can be really pricey. Framing, if you have stuff that you want to hang on the walls, there's definitely a lot of surprises. So, I always tell people, don't just think of it as the equipment expenses. Think about all that stuff. So when we, as a frame of reference, when we opened in Florida, so we were opening in November of 2014. Moved out here September 1st, 2014 with a wife who was 7.5 months pregnant. And our contractor just sprung it on us that we were $100,000 over budget one day, like four weeks out from like opening up. It's like, how does this happen? And you go and you meticulously scrutinize what's actually in there. And we had a 7,700 square foot facility, and our architect had drawn it up for 55 electrical outlets. That's literally an outlet like every 4 feet. It was like the most comical. And what had happened is there were old outlets that were there that he hadn't taken out, and he had added new ones in certain places. And so it had driven our like electrical expense up like by literally like $15,000. So there were a lot of little things like that if we hadn't scrutinized, we would have missed them. We were just taking it on the chin. So anytime there's any kind of like expansion like that, you really have to check all the boxes in terms of making sure you're not getting stuck. And and honestly, that's why I always try to encourage people to go to like good vendors who will get on the phone and talk you through stuff. Like I know like the crew at Perform Better is awesome. Like you can tell them kind of what you need, and they'll offer you suggestions. They do like facility mock-ups for people at no charge. So like there's actually a really well-known professional baseball player who we don't train. He's very affluent, but I know his agent well. And so he reached out for some suggestions, and I put him in touch with Chris at Perform Better, and they've done like an amazing job for it. So I always just, try to support good people that understand what you need.
Okay. Cause I'm about a month away from opening, and that flooring definitely.
It surprises you. What kind of flooring are you getting? You getting rollout, or are you getting panels?
We're getting panels right now.
Don't do it. Whatever you do, don't do it.
They look better and they're easier to fix. That's what we kind of agreed upon.
Ooh, I have panels in Massachusetts, and they're way overpriced and such a headache. And they slide and all that stuff. We got rollouts in Florida, and they're incredible.
Our since we have all that crap and snow here.
Yeah. That's a tough one.
If come off, we can kind of like just Lego it out of there.
If you're in Boston, go out and look at our panels in the Hudson facility. Trust me, just go walk around on them and ask Pete how crazy they are. And I'll take some pictures of the ones in Florida. It's so much better. And there's probably, granted, the facility's about half the size. I bet we have a quarter the cost in flooring down here, and I think it actually works better. So I'll never do panels again. I'm always gonna be a roll it out guy.
Good to know.
And not that the panels, I don't know what size you're getting. I think the ones we have in Mass are 4x6. They're like 100 pounds a piece, and they're 3/4 inch thick. Those things are a bear to move. They will absolutely destroy your hands and your back.
Yeah, I'm doing the work myself, so.
Make sure you get some good gardening gloves from Home Depot. You'll thank me later.
Oh yeah. All right, cool.
I made every one of these mistakes, I promise you.
Gardening gloves.
At this point in your career, you feel like you're fairly well set, like you're Eric Cressey, the guy, or you kind of realize that every single one of your clients can quit at any given moment and you could be homeless within a month? Like, what's kind of your mindset? Are you excited about going to work every day? You have big goals where you go from here? Or are you just looking to like crunch hard and maintain what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I could never be that guy that like retires at 40. That's not my thing. I genuinely do enjoy what I do. Like I'm very fortunate. Like I get to go and hang out with a bunch of pro baseball players every day at work and listen to Rage Against the Machine. Like it's not a bad gig, but the biggest thing is enjoying working with people. And honestly, what I actually enjoy just as much is like being challenged by our staff, like young enthusiastic coaches that want to get better, that want to, be mentored and ask tough questions and figure out how we can collectively work together. So it's really interesting looking at like our Massachusetts facility. Christian and John were both college athletes that trained with us, and now they're like rock stars. Like John does a staff in service. I'm like, that's awesome. That's going to impact what we do. I look at what Christian does on the mechanical side of things. It's really, really cool. So, I think certainly your priorities shift. I don't ever feel like I've made it. Like that's not who I am. And I don't want to be perceived that way either. I think it's really, really easy to get comfortable. And like, I don't worry about myself getting down that path just because, to be honest, like, I don't know how to take time off. I'm really, really bad at it. Like vacations, we don't know how to do them. So that's probably a conversation for a psychologist someday. But in the meantime, I think we're riding this wave, and we'll see where it takes us. I can't say I really have a true 5 or 10 year plan, but we're starting to talk and figure out what that might be.
Side note, since you mentioned John O'Neill, those old timey baseball.
They're unbelievable. That mustache is amazing.
Amazing.
He's like John might, like we've always seen like the Dos Equis commercials, but John might be the most interesting man alive. Like I'm reminded of it on an absolute daily basis. Actually, a good John O'Neill story, since we're on the phone about it, is when John came up to do his first evaluation. We always do like a sit down meeting with the athletes, and his dad was actually with him. And so we're in the office going through the whole screen. We go his health history and describes his shoulder surgery and do some stuff. We get to the part where it's time to do the posture stuff. So I asked him to take his shirt off. He's like, can we just do it with the shirt on? I was like, yeah, it's okay. I'm like, maybe it's like not a cover with his body or poison ivy or something like that. So I kind of just glazed over it. We go through the rest of the evaluation. I just like did it through his shirt, felt where his shoulder blades were and everything. And we got on the floor, and his dad goes to get coffee. He's like, hey man, thank you for doing that. He's like, I got a tattoo earlier this weekend. I didn't want my dad to see it. So that's the John O'Neill introduction.
He wouldn't go out to wings with us when he was my intern at RTS ever, because he's allergic to flavor. He doesn't like anything with sauce or that tastes good.
Never had soup. He was 25 when he has first slice of pizza.
Yeah.
That's terrible. That sounds like a terrible life.
His lunch every day during his internship at RTS was literally boiled chicken breast and blueberries. He ate it every fucking day. That's all he ate.
He told me that he has brought a peanut butter and jelly sandwich to every birthday party he's gone to since he was 5 years old. He brings his own food to birthday parties. And it's not like he's bringing like healthy food necessarily. Like you're almost better off just eating the birthday cake, but that's John.
Yeah, he's a goober, man.
I just have a question about just more of, I don't know, your business experience. Like you opened in 2007, you said?
Yep.
And that was that right out of school?
It was a couple years. I got out of school in 2005, so it was 18 to 24 months.
So did you have, in those 2 years, did you have, I don't know, some sort of like internship or mentorship that you started learning the business aspect, or I'm assuming at this point, a lot of your business has been learned through experience, but did you ever have like any sort of business savviness beforehand, like going into this, or was it something that you kind of just really were really afraid of and then went into it and you figured it out as you went?
Yeah, where I was lucky is I actually come from a family of accountants, and I went to my undergrad experience actually wanting to be an accountant. I went to Babson College, which is actually a really well-known entrepreneurial school, for my first 2 years, and it was like at the end of sophomore year where I was like, I think I really want to do something else. So I transferred all those management credits into a sports management program and double majored in exercise science, and then went and did my grad degree in exercise science. So I always had kind of like that entrepreneurial thing about me. Like I worked at a tennis club for 8 summers growing up. I learned how to string rackets, and I made a couple $1,000s every summer stringing rackets for the members. So I think I don't want to say I was like the lemonade stand kid, but I always kind of had that way about me. But I was fortunate to have some good people that did have that know-how. What's interesting is my business partner, Pete was actually my roommate at Babson freshman year. We were randomly assigned freshman year roommates. When we basically stayed in touch all those years. And when it came time to open the facility in Massachusetts, what had happened was I had started as an independent contractor, and I want to say I had like 47 clients, something like that. Like I literally did 13-hour days, 7 days a week, training people. And it just got to the point where like I couldn't do all the scheduling, all the billing, all that stuff. And so when it came time to open up, it was like, Pete, come in, take that part of it. I'll do this. Tony Gentilcore came on, and he really handled me on the technical side of things, with making sure that I didn't have to be there for every single minute on the floor. And so it was kind of a good opportunity to kind of, I guess, redirect our efforts accordingly. So, but I did have that background, but I one of the things I'll absolutely tell you is I don't consider myself a good manager. It's something I'm not really great at, and largely it's just due to time. There's a really good book called The Captain's Class, and one of the things that they talk about in the book is if you look at I think they looked at the best 25 teams of all time across all sports. They looked at Michael Jordan's Bulls. They looked at the Celtics with Bill Russell. They looked at Brazilian national team with Pele, and they talked about how the best player was never the captain. It never works out well, and it sounds kind of arrogant for me to say I'm the best player, but there's definitely the most demands on me. I get the hardest evaluations. I see the most post-op cases. So I usually have the most challenging things to do on a daily basis from an evaluative and programming standpoint. So that's one of the things that we try to do is take that managerial load off of me. Let me be the, kind of the idea guy. Pete can be the pump the brakes guy. And then I can just worry about coaching. It's been a dramatic difference. The last, year and a half with John has been incredibly helpful in that regard.
So a lot of it has just been really understanding how to delegate the jobs to the right people and taking on your skill set the way that you can.
Yeah. I don't know that I love the idea of delegating. I think I like the word empower a lot better.
Okay.
Just because, I think it assumes that you're actually going to give them the tools that they need to be successful with it. But yeah, the other thing I would tell you is Pete has an MBA, and I think if he came on this, and he has been on these group chats before, I think he would tell you that he hasn't used 99.9% of that MBA, as he's gone through our business. It's a lot more basic accounting. But there, certainly it teaches you how to work hard, teaches you how to work in teams and all that. But I'm not sure that you need an MBA to be a successful business person in the fitness industry. You just need to not make really big, dumb decisions.
Use some common sense.
It's true. But, and sadly, I think there are times when it's not. So as a frame of reference, I have a close friend, I won't tell you who it is, who opened a facility a couple of years ago, and I've known him for 7 or 8 years. And, my wife and I, we'll go out to dinner with him and his wife when we're in town to see them. And he started a business and it wasn't going well. And, he and his wife were kind of at each other's throats because she would handle the business side of things and the accounting, and he would handle the gym. And, so they were struggling, and she actually sent me a text. She's like, "Would you mind talking with him?" I was like, "Yeah, for sure." So Pete and I did a conference call with him, and they were 6 or 7 months in and just hemorrhaging money. So I was like, "Can you just send me just give me a profit and loss, show me kind of what you're doing in a typical, it stays between us." And so he pulled it up, and he was spending $600 a month on a towel service. It was $1,800 on a cleaning service. All this is dude, that's part of the entrepreneur experience. You clean your own damn gym. When you're not making money, you don't pay somebody to clean the gym that's not being used. Yeah. Rein it back in. And actually they're absolutely thriving now. It's going really, really well. But he's a great trainer and a wonderful human being. His wife is very, very astute on the business side of things. She's worried about worse on accounting principles and all that. But, sometimes you just, those things just slip through. You try so hard to follow what other people in the industry are doing or keep up with the Joneses or anything like that. And I'm sure there are people that look and see Mark Fisher Fitness. If you try to compare yourself to Mark Fisher Fitness, you will fail miserably because Mark is in an incredibly high price market. So your gross number is going to be so much different than his. Certainly his rent is astronomically higher than what you're going to pay. They're just, they can get away with their, kind of their approach, being very outlandish and all that in a market of Broadway performers who make a living being outlandish. You can't do Mark Fisher Fitness in the, in a very, very conservative world, So I always caution people about trying to compare themselves to other businesses and trying to follow one specific business model. You have to do what's right for you, but there are certain principles that are more important, don't spend more money than you're making.
Yeah. That's a good one. Thank you. That was very helpful.
You got it.
All right, guys, it's a little after 8 and I want to be respectful of Eric's time and everything. So let's wrap it up. If anybody has anything last real quick, we'll do it and then close this thing down.
I'm just sad we didn't get into any shit talking of Duffy, but maybe throw one of that.
I'd come back on just for that.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, Eric.
Who handles his Duffy Rules Instagram?
That's actually an amazing story that I will tell. So my neighbor Pat lives next door to me, And he came in and started training, and it was actually very, very hush hush. Wasn't like public knowledge for a while. And so he ran that for probably like 6 or 7 months. And it was amazing because we had like multiple staff members who were like reaching out to John's like old friends to get info. We were stealing it from like his Facebook page and everything. So they ran all this. And you know how it actually happened? Pete like left his phone on his desk when he like went to the bathroom, and Pat texted him, was like, "Hey, you got any material for Duffy Rules for me today?" And Frank was like in Pete's office drinking a coffee, and he saw it, and that's how it broke out. But he's like been a good sport. He still has a lot of fun with it. I think it's amazing, isn't it?
I love looking. I love when it is like updated on my feed.
Yeah, the thing that's hard to appreciate about our mass facilities. So I live a 440-foot walk from our facility. It's embarrassing. I usually drive to work, and then Pat lives right there. So we actually have like several of my neighbors that also train at the facility. So like pretty much my whole neighborhood like knows our staff as family at this point. So there's a lot of ball busting that goes on.
The highlight of my social media was one of my pictures of Frank was used on it. I was like, that was a picture I took.
Hey, if you've got good stuff, by all means send it along. I'll make sure it goes to good use.
Oh, hell yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, Eric. I appreciate your time, man.
Thanks for having me. That was fun, guys.
Absolutely.
We'll do it
Thanks,
again.
Eric.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
You too, Eric.
Bye.